This episode of I Work For Him is sponsored by SaferNet, Patriot Mobile, and the U.S. Christian Chamber 2026 Expo, found online at swc2026.com, code I Work For Him. You've tuned into I Work For Him, the voice of collaboration for the faith and work movement.
We are your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and our mission is to inspire every workplace believer to recognize their workplace as their ministry place where they work with God every day. What can that look like in your workplace? Well, let's find out right now.
Newsflash. Most kingdom-minded business owners destroy their culture when they leave or retire. I've seen it over and over. They sell to the highest bidder, or so they think, and when they do, it's usually to a private equity firm. These firms come in, clean house, make the bottom line look awesome, and destroy culture because all they want to do is gain 40% yearly return and sell at 4 times the price they paid 5 years down the road. It doesn't matter that the private equity firm promised to preserve your kingdom culture. It rarely happens. I've witnessed countless former owners who made a lot of money on the sale, but mourn the loss of all that they poured into their former company and the loss of a culture that celebrated God and honored people. You know, love God, love people. You know, I recognize that. We're called in Romans 12:2 to change the way we think. And today, Brandt will do just that. He's going to bring a solution to the table that solves this problem and honors God with people and still lets the owner retire and make a great profit. Win, win, win. Brandt Brereton, welcome to I Work For Him.
Thank you, Jim and Martha.
Did I get the last name right, Brandt? I forgot to ask before we started recording. Is that okay? Did I do okay?
Really well.
All right. Brandt, we do this with every guest when it's the first time they're on the show. Tell us your Jesus story. When did Jesus change your life?
Yeah, so twofold answer, I would say. I accepted Christ at age 10 in a Southern Baptist church that we grew up in. But despite that, I would say God benched me. He loved me enough to bench me from investment banking at age 49. And through a series of circumstances, literally gave me no choice but to join this international ministry, evangelical ministry called City Team. So think inner city rescue mission in 6 different major cities with this seemingly orthogonal other ministry of church planting among various people groups, Muslim people groups in sub-Saharan Africa. So for example, I got to spend 3 weeks in Sierra Leone, totally eye-opening experience. So for 2.5 years, God benched me for repairs, grounded for repairs is kind of how I put it, and got me really clear on, I was wrapped around the axle on money, like a lot of us, in finance are. And he got me really clear in that 2 years of grounded for repairs time on money, stewardship, just things that I never would have taken the time to do the deep dive on, and frankly wasn't hearing a lot from pulpits on. And so that experience, I would say, really informs my conviction to solve this problem. And, when we can talk about it more, but when you look at the richness of ministry that is happening inside business as ministry. So I use this term, BAM, acronym, business as ministry. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with. Really informs the conviction that I know that this is what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life, and meeting like-minded men and forming this investment fund to really get serious and intentional about solving the problem.
That's super. It's interesting that you say, and I think we hear a lot of people say this, that whatever it is that we're internally wrestling with, we may not be hearing it other places. So God has churned you. He benched you, as he said, and had you on the ground for repairs. And the fact that you acknowledge that and that you actually utilize that and allowed him to grow you is huge. And I don't want that to be lost on our listeners, because sometimes we can feel like, well, nobody else is wrestling with this issue I'm wrestling with. But God has a plan. And so this plan, ultimately, we're going to talk about the book that God has written through you, called Perpetuate. Jim is holding it up for the YouTube watchers. But, this problem that you're talking about is perpetuating kingdom culture from the founder to whatever that next is. It's rarely done well, right? Or maybe even done at all. Why is this such an issue for people today?
Yeah, you're right. Here's how I would put it. There's this. Imagine a spectrum. On the left side of the spectrum are lower middle market business owners that demographically, most of us are baby boomers, have to sell for liquidity. And on the left side of that spectrum are people that just say, I need to get as much cash as I can possibly get, shift the business risk to the third party as much as possible, as fast as possible.
So hang on, I want to explain a couple of things, because you're using financial words and not everybody understands it. Basically, the business owner needs to sell because he's got all of his cash and investments tied up in his business. So he needs cash in order to live in retirement. And the lie in there is that he thinks he needs to get all of it out because he's worried he's going to have enough money to get to the end, and he or she forgets that God is his provider. And so they think, I've got to have all this money so that I could I can go on vacation for 30 years. Again, retirement's not biblical. Go to iretireforhim.com. We have a long conversation about that. We also have a book and a podcast about that. So two lies that are feeding into all this. I want to make sure that people understand. People think, I got to have enough money, and because I've got to be able to go on vacation for 30 years and pay all my bills because I deserve it.
Because I've worked hard all these years for that.
Right. It's the lie that the American dream is biblical. Okay. So
that's what the world tells us. That's what Wall Street tells us. It's not in the Bible. And I couldn't agree more. And by the way, what makes that so hard to do is the level of taxation, which I'll get into, because this strategy, well-worn strategy, addresses the tax issues. But the spectrum, right? So there's those people that they don't care about perpetuating the culture of the business. They're just trying to solve for money. On the other very extreme end of the spectrum are deeply committed owners of purpose-driven companies, and they're going to perpetuate the independence and the kingdom impact of the business, no matter how much cash on the barrelhead. But if you move one quadrant to the left on that spectrum, and you're in the middle of that curve where most people are being seduced by private equity groups, most of which are secular, trying to get, more cash at close than they could get historically from the ESOP transaction. There's a lot, thousands of BAM owners and stewards that if you told them that they could get the same amount of cash at close that they're going to get by selling to a secular private equity group, but they get to retain control of the board and perpetuate the kingdom impact and culture of the business because of that retained control.
Okay. Again, I'm going to stop you. Just want to make sure I explain stuff, because you've got a lot of stuff in your head that makes sense to you. And a lot of people listening today go, I don't, tell me, wait a minute, say this again. The issue is that a lot of owners, as they're trying to get out, they find that the easiest place to sell is not to find another owner that will perpetuate and just jump in, or it's not somebody that will rise up within the ranks that's got the cash. So they go to private equity. Private equity says, hey, I'll give you X, and that X happens to be a very attractive number. And so they sell out. But yet they've had a mindset of faith and work, of business as mission. Their culture in their company is a kingdom culture where God is honored and people are loved. I mean, that's what they have. And they want that perpetuated. And so they tell the private equity guys that, like, this is what makes my company so awesome. And the private equity guys are looking at the profit and loss and the balance sheet and going, yeah, but I see an extra 200% or 300% in here that I could find if I could just get you out of the way. And so they go in and they buy this. They tell this guy whatever he needs to hear.
I was going to say, they're probably saying, yeah.
They say,
okay.
yeah, sure, yep. And then all of a sudden they do it. And then we've heard stories in under 6 months, all the good people are gone. The culture is destroyed. It's cut and sliced and diced and chopped and minced, and nothing is left but a shell of the original company, but it's worth a lot more money. because it's more profitable. And what you're saying, Brandt, and really the summary of the Perpetuate is that an employee stock ownership plan that can save the kingdom culture. And when we get back to this conversation in a second, I want to really dig into that and how you got to be so passionate about it. But
how he got to be so passionate. And Jim, obviously, this resonates with you as well, because we have seen the brokenness that comes from, this kind of takeover.
Well, and you got to, anybody that's listened to the show for any amount of time understands that we have interviewed thousands of people. We have been on location at hundreds and hundreds of kingdom companies, and we have seen the decimation, the nuclear effect of these private equity purchases. I mean, it's just, let me just, how do I say
heartbreaking.
This? Heartbreaking. That's a way better way to say it. I was going to say something else. All right. Dave Ramsey's got a saying. It's that one. Okay. All right. God gives each of us different passions. He's given Brandt a passion to save kingdom culture. And one of our passions that Martha and I find ourselves living out is a responsibility to let others know the things that we've learned, like talking about employee stock ownership. Right now, there are several things we want our listeners to know that are critical for the kingdom on how we spend our dollars on things that support our values. That's why we promote companies like Patriot Mobile for our mobile service, e-payments for our processing, SaferNet to protect our computers. That's just to mention a few. Each of these companies share our values, don't hide their faith, and offer products or services that align biblically. The complete list of our sponsor pages on iworkforyourim.com/sponsors. I know you'll be glad when you check that page out and start using them. Brandt, how did you get so passionate about this subject of perpetuating kingdom culture through employee stock ownership plans?
Yeah, I will. Before I do that though, I'm going to bounce back to that. I won't spend a bunch of time, but just that last point. So you mentioned what you just described are secular private equity groups telling people what they want to hear in order to execute against their formula.
No, I did not. No, I did not. I am talking about Christian private equity firms that have done exactly the same thing.
So what I would say, my observation is that Christian private equity groups and Christian family offices have generally, not always, but generally done a good job at allowing that ministry culture and those investments to continue as long as they're holding the investment. But once it's time to sell that company, because of the world that they live in and the fund life, it doesn't matter who they sell it to. And so the problem is just getting kicked down the road. And so that's what good, we all know this, good is the enemy of great. And when you can, through this structure, which is designed to perpetuate independence indefinitely, when you can do that, that's what solves the problem. And the good news is that you can solve this problem without any sacrifice. You can drive the same investment returns. You just need to spend 10 hours understanding some algebra. It really is that simple. But your question is, how did I get passionate about this? It was the grounded for repairs season of my life, to be sure. But then meeting Mike Sharo and Greg Leith, the CEOs, respectively, of C12 and Convene, and being exposed to these companies that are unbelievable, right? I mean, like, just take C12, 2,800 companies in that network, 21,000 salvations on average per year in the workplace, 115,000 people being discipled, and probably most notably, $530 million a year coming out of the profits of those businesses into ministry. They're all baby boomers. They're getting picked off by secular private equity groups or taking the good instead of the great solution. And so there are people, Jim and Martha, that you and I will meet in heaven, literally, because of where they worked. They will never darken the door of a church, but because of where they work and the Christian stewardship and leadership of that business, and what's availed to those employees in the workforce, it's bringing thousands of people to the Lord. And we cannot set back and just let the world or let financiers take advantage of it and not perpetuate the most important part of that business. The most important part of the business isn't the money that's being generated. We American business people use money, we use people to get profits, to get business done. We use people to get profits done. And what Jesus wants us to do is use business to get people done.
Boy, say it again.
Oh, that's good.
A little slower.
We collectively, American capitalists, I would say, use people to get business done. And as with everything in the kingdom that's turned on its head, what Jesus wants us to do is use business to get people done.
And I'd say it's not turning it on its head, turn it on its feet, because we're turning it right side up. All right, I want to talk about some of the examples, but I want to go into this ESOP conversation a little bit more, because people, I mean, that's the solution. And when I read your book, I'm like, okay, I get this. And I loved it. It made sense to me because Martha and I have experienced this. I mean, agonizingly have experienced this. Why are ESOPs so rarely talked about? Where did all these misperceptions come from?
That's a great question. Tons of misconceptions. I would say that it's twofold. One is when these laws came out in the 70s, remember the 70s, right? We were in hyperinflation, stagflation, the stock market was in the tank, and this was a really, really good solution for sellers of businesses back then. And so all of the CPAs that were practicing in the 70s and maybe up until 1980 really understood these, and there were no misconceptions. They were very, very popular. President Reagan came in, changed the country for the better, in my opinion. Deregulation, reduction in taxes, the stock market took off and has like a rocket since then, frankly. And there's this explosion of 11,000 private equity groups that got formed over all these years, looking at this demographical baby boomer seller wave that's cresting over 20, 30 years. We're literally right in the middle of it right now. Mm-hmm. And the younger, my son is a CPA, right? He can barely keep up with the continuing professional education requirements. And so there's so many private equity groups hounding sellers that these CPAs and even attorneys for that matter are just so busy answering the phone, billable hours, helping these people get these transactions done that none of the CPAs of our generation haven't had any reason to go back and dust off those old laws and rules. And so it's just like nobody has studied it. There's a handful throughout the country, and they're huge proponents of ESOPs. So I think that's the macro answer to the question. Maybe the micro answer to the question is, and by the way, I was 100% guilty of doing this as an investment banker before I did the deep dive on ESOPs. So I am guilty. Which is why I know that this is what happens, because I did it.
Right.
When you don't know enough about something and you get asked about it, it's embarrassing to not be able to explain what you know. So you deflect, you make the muddy, waters muddy, and you focus people on what you know or what you want to. And so that's a big part of it.
So we're not going to be able to cover all of this conversation. Obviously, I encourage you to get a copy of Perpetuate, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes. Brandt, I want to make sure that we at least address some of really what we're talking about. We're saying, hey, instead of selling to a private equity group, sell to form an ESOP. So let's explain this ESOP thing, because will a business owner have to sacrifice the same selling price that he would have gotten? Let's just say that the business is worth $1 million sale to a private equity firm. Small potatoes in today's world, but $1 million. Because $1 million barely buys a house in California today, a starter home. Not that California's a great place to move anyway, but anyway. So
off topic.
Off
here,
topic.
Jim.
Sorry. But so let's just say a private equity group's going to offer Bob $1 million for his business. Can Bob get the same $1 million from an ESOP?
Yeah. So the ESOP can match third-party bids. So you're never going to sacrifice the valuation of the business when you sell to the ESOP. What you historically sacrificed before our fund was how much cash you were going to get. So you could sell the business for that $1 million, but instead of getting $500,000 in cash and the rest over time from an outsider, you would get 10 million. I'm sorry, 100,000 up front, and you would carry back a seller note for 90%. Well, now with our fund, so the bank lends to the ESOP, we come below the bank, subordinate to the bank. We also lend to the ESOP. So the buyer of that stock is not some fund that's trying to get control, dictate pace of exit, et cetera, and stress everybody out and make cuts. It's this trust, and the trust buys the shares from the sellers, and the trust also holds this value of stock that the employees get to slowly vest into becoming beneficiaries of the dollar value of, just like a family trust. So the employees don't have to come up with any money. They're not actually buying and holding the stock. They have no say in any kind of changes to the business. They're just like our kids and our grandkids are in our family trusts. They are beneficiaries of the dollar value that's in that trust, and they get money from the trust based on how we write the trust. Exact same concept.
So I think it's important for listeners that the owners, the founders of the companies really need to be the ones that are aware of this opportunity to do an ESOP, because it's not like some of the employees, in most cases, they're not going to get together and go, hey, we should have an ESOP so we can, take over and keep the company the way it is and all of that. So this conversation really needs to get to the founders and owners of these companies. Is that correct?
Correct. They need to understand that now, because of capital that is lent to the ESOP, our fund and others are popping up, which is fantastic, that you can sell to the ESOP now and get retain control, get a bunch of tax advantages, and get the same amount of cash. Now it's equal. You're not making a financial sacrifice by doing the right thing and selling to the ESOP. You're going to get the same amount of cash, same valuation, same amount of cash at close, and you get to perpetuate the kingdom impact of that business into the future.
And that is so important.
It is. So Jim and I feel really strongly about protecting our values and not compromising the things that we believe in. And earlier in the show, Jim talked about several of our show sponsors that don't compromise their values either. And another way to stay strong and resist the urge to compromise is to surround yourself with other Christians in business that can help you to keep you accountable. The U.S. Christian Chamber of Commerce is an organization that serves that purpose. The U.S. Christian Chamber connects you to a national network of faith-driven businesses committed to excellence and ethics. So join the movement today. Go to uschristianchamber.com, and also SWC 2026. I'll put that in the show notes. That is the expo that we will be attending next year, where you can rub shoulders, sit next to each other, and experience commerce in a new kingdom way. And
not just attending, Martha, you and I will get to be emceeing that event.
Yes.
It'll be a lot of fun. All right, so Brandt, in this scenario where Bob, our business owner, doesn't sell to private equity, but forms an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan, who runs the company then? Because Bob wants to retire.
Yeah, great question. So nothing changes in the ESOP structure except the shareholders. So he gets to retain control of his board of directors, right? Which is the most important aspect of this. The board does the hiring and firing of management. And so literally nothing changes except for the shareholders. And so if Bob wants to retire, then, by the way, we oftentimes get help. We're not going to force ourselves on anybody, but if they ask for our help, we will collectively come in and help solve for those succession issues.
Okay, but a lot of business owners don't have a board. Hang on, a lot of business owners don't have a board of directors because they've been running the business on their own. It's been their own deal for 40 years.
Yeah.
So you're saying they need to form a board of directors that's going to help perpetuate their kingdom thing before they can actually do this, because most business owners are like, I got this. I don't need no stinking board.
Yeah, they do have boards. They just don't know it.
There you go.
All of us have boards, but yes, you have to. There's some formalization where you have to operate the business in a board of director governance sort of fashion. And so, yeah, that is part of what you have to do, is kind of formalize the corporate governance to some extent, which you need to do in order to affect all of these things. But the point is, how do secular private equity groups solve succession when they buy a company? They look and see, is there a successor in the business? Generally not. And then they go do a search.
Yeah.
Executive search plan. So we collectively can all do that, the very same thing. That's not rocket science to solve for.
You know, if you're listening to the show today and you know of a business owner who's thinking about selling, and they're thinking about private equity, or they're just thinking about selling,
you don't even know what they're thinking.
Brandt, we want to be able to get in front of the bus, because private equity people, I know it's not categorically, but often will tell the business owner whatever they need to hear so they can get the deal done. And they'll promise perpetuate the culture, whatever they got to do. And I'm not sending a judgment out there, because I know that there's always exceptions to the rule. How do we stop somebody, if somebody's already thinking about selling and they've already talked to a private equity person, maybe they've already even signed a letter of intent? Can we get in front of this bus if it's already rolling downhill?
Yeah. If they haven't signed a letter of intent yet, then the answer is clearly yes. If they have signed a letter of intent, the answer is maybe. Generally speaking, the ESOP, which is an internal retirement plan, it's an internal captive buyer of the business, that's not a third-party change of control buyer for the business, which is usually how those letters of intent are written. So what I have seen is almost always the company, even if they're under LOI, can be exploring this alternative and not be breaching the terms of the letter of intent. So they need an hour and a side-by-side, which is always what we do. Here's the deal that you have in your hand, or here's what you're gonna have in your hand, because I've sold thousands of companies to know what's going to happen. And here's what the alternative would look like with the ESOP. And quantitatively, here are the differences. Here's the amount of after-tax cash at close differences. And then qualitatively, here are the differences in terms of your ability to continue to perpetuate culture.
And if I remember your book correctly, I mean, there's a significant tax advantage to an ESOP as opposed to just a private equity sale, correct? You got to be short on this because we're running out of time, right? Yes?
Yes.
I feel like this is one of those shows where you have to say, nothing is intended to be as legal advice, but we need to have you consult with, perpetuatecapital.com to find out more information, because we certainly don't want anybody to go, I heard on that podcast I could do this, because we don't know your situations, but there's hope. And that's what we want people to hear.
We have to look at this is a stewardship thing. I know, Brandt, I know we could talk about this for 7 hours. This is a stewardship thing. The parable of the talents. This is all about the parable of the talents. You've been given a business by God. You've been given talents to run that business by God. He has allowed your business to grow, to multiply, to be worth a significant amount of money, so much potential in that business that private equity people are drooling over the chance to get it so they can multiply their money 3, 4, 5 times over a period of 5 years. That's the kind of potential you got. So as a steward, you've got to ask the question, not in the American dream sense of the way, what does the Bible tell me to do with this? The Lord is saying, money is, listen, I'm going to pave the roads in heaven with gold, the stuff that you think is so important. Let's talk about what's really important, and that's the souls of the people that have been working for you all of this time and the future people that are going to work for you. That's why an ESOP is so important. But the question people are asking, especially if there's people think about this, Brandt, is where's the money coming from? Because the employees, if they had the money, they'd offer the owner the money to buy the business out so that he wouldn't sell it to private equity. Because if any business owner, if any employee knows anything, they know that that's a bad deal. Private equity, somebody's going to lose their job. So where's the money coming from? If an ESOP is formed, where does the ESOP get the money to pay off the owner?
Yeah, the bank lends money to the ESOP, and our fund lends money to the ESOP. And so where does the money in our fund come from? It comes from, first of all, our families, where we've invested big percentages of our net worth into the fund. C12 members, convene members, guys who've sold their business and have a pile of cash and want to kind of pay it forward with others, and individual investors that are looking for income and an inflation hedge through upside. It's basically private equity investors that have been enlightened with this knowledge and this expertise to contort that private equity investment to be a loan to the ESOP so the ESOP can do the work. We don't have to have control of things and own things and affect change. What we have to do is provide capital, same return profile, provide capital to excellent run companies that are doing a great job, that don't need to be fixed. We just need to solve for liquidity and control retention. And this is the most elegant solution in structure to do it with.
That was a lot. You just said a lot. But basically, so you're saying the bank's going to come in. If in Bob's sale example of $1 million, the bank's going to come in. They're not going to loan more than 80% on that. They're going to want you to have a 20% equity stake. Are you guys that other 20% equity stake to help get this ESOP started?
In Bob's deal, 100% sale price, he's going to get 75 to 80% cash at close, and the rest is going to be contingent.
Okay.
In our scenario, they're going to get the same 75 to 80% cash at close, and it's going to come from a bank, just like the private equity guys do, and it's going to come from our fund, just like the private equity guys do. But it's going to, and he's going to carry back a small seller note, which effectively is equity in the structure, because he needs to keep skin in the game on this thing to make sure that everything transitions correctly to the next generation over the next five or 6 years. But because Perpetuate's investment fund is filling the hole that has existed and was being taken advantage of by private equity groups. Now that we exist and we can plug that hole, equalize cash flowing to the seller at close, but do it in this structure that preserves the integrity of their control and eliminates all taxation on the earnings engine that is the business. It's just a better way to go.
You know, I think the key of what I'm hearing in all of this for the listener is that you've got some people behind you for your fund, Perpetuate Capital Fund, that wants this business to perpetuate the kingdom culture that has been created through God's design in whatever industry you're in, whatever amount of employees you have. And so it's a support system in a sense of saying, you know what, we want this part to succeed. We want all of it to succeed. We want the business to continue, but with this amazing kingdom culture. And so I think that's the bottom line of what we want our listeners to hear, is that there is other alternatives out there that may not be getting attention where it's needed. And we're so excited that you've put, and you know, I will tell the listeners, this is not a 500-page manual. Thank goodness, right? Because it can be a very overwhelming, daunting. This is a book that you can pick up, Perpetuate, Selling Your Business Without Selling Out, that in a day, you could have a better understanding of what God has possible for your business. And then to take the next steps and to reach out on your website, perpetuatecapital.com, and really pray about how God wants you to take your business into the next generation in a way that will keep it perpetuating.
Honoring God
Yeah.
and loving people. Brandt Brereton, I know we could talk about this forever, and I'm probably just as passionate about this as you are. I just don't have the capital. But I'm grateful that you brought this to our attention. I'm grateful that you wrote the book. I'm grateful that Perpetuate Capital is helping solve some of the unnecessary nonsense that's been going on in Christian kingdom companies over the last several decades. Brandt Brereton, thanks for being on I Work For Him today.
Yes, thank you. Bless you guys.
You've been listening to I Work For Him with your host, Jim and Martha Brangenberg. We're Christ followers in our workplace. It's our mission field, but ultimately, I work for him. This episode of I Work For Him is sponsored by SaferNet.com, PatriotMobile.com/I Work For Him, and the U.S. Christian Chamber 2026 Expo, found online at SWC2026.com, code I Work For Him.
Thanks for listening to the I Work For Him podcast with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg. Please visit iworkforhim.com to learn more about connecting your faith and work, to join the I Work For Him Nation, and to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. While you're there, check out the Tapestry database, a growing directory of faith and work organizations. You can also follow us on social media at I Work For Him to stay up to date and meet our guests. If today's message spoke to you, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. Your review will launch more workplace missionaries across America. That's I Work For Him and online at iworkforhim.com. I work, the number 4, him.com.